With the release of the supposed final entry in the Halloween franchise, Halloween Ends, I figured it would be the perfect time to stop and rank all 13 movies in this big franchise, from the worst to the best. Let's get started. Welcome back to the channel. My name is Ben. On this channel, I love to talk about movies and TV, and if you also love to talk about movies and TV, consider hitting that like and subscribe button. If you're new to these types of videos, basically I'm just going to be ranking all of these movies from the worst to the best. That includes the Rob Zombie movies, obviously the movies with Laurie Strode, all the movies in the Halloween franchise. They have the name Halloween in them, I'm including on this list. But the final thing before we get started, make sure to let me know down below in the comment section, what is your ranking of the Halloween movies? We're going to have different lists. I'm going to have a different opinion than you might have, and that's okay because film is subjective. And with that being said, let's get started. Now, these bottom couple movies are all pretty bad, but coming in last place is going to be Rob Zombie's Halloween 2 from 2009. Now, I'll just straight up say it, I hate the Rob Zombie Halloween movies. They have the worst writing, including the dumbest dialogue I've heard in most of these movies. It makes me feel gross and icky watching it because of the characters being so gross to one another, and also being over-sexualized. Everything in this movie is over-sexualized. The characters are a big problem. Laurie, the actress that plays Laurie, is so damn annoying. She feels miscast in the role, I feel personally. Loomis is this full of himself douchebag. The iteration of Loomis in these two movies is bad. It shows hints of exploring trauma and what it can do to people affected by that trauma, but that just gets completely overshadowed by how bad the rest of the movie is. Don't even get me started about the white horse stuff. Like, Laurie and Michael both see ghosts now. I don't understand it. It's rather nonsensical garbage. I think that's a great way to put it. The ending, which is just setting up another movie, and thank God they didn't do another one, had me screaming WTF. Just above Halloween 2 is Halloween from 2007, the other Rob Zombie movie. Everything about this movie is hectic. The dialogue, the characters, who are all incredibly rude to one another specifically, and just rude in general, like I briefly mentioned. They're all just scum of the earth, bad human beings. I am not a fan of Robbie's style of dark, utterly disturbing storytelling. It made me feel genuinely sick. And some of the situations too, like Michael killing a woman in the hospital after he's already admitted to the hospital. He kills the nurse who kind of comes in to check up on him with a metal knife. No patient in any hospital or prison for that matter is going to have a metal knife. Especially if there's someone who has a history of violence, that would never happen. That was just one situation that I don't think would ever happen in real life. The only thing I'll give this movie is that it kind of does something new for like the first 45 minutes. The first half of this movie starts off differently. You get more of a backstory with Michael, and there's more exploring him as a child, changing specific plot beats around. Then once Michael breaks out of prison, it then takes specific shots from the original movie from 1978 and just repeats a lot of the same story beats from that movie. I don't know if they could have made a more dumb and immature version of Laurie too. Not that these movies can get any worse, but there was surprisingly a movie that was even worse than this movie. Just above that is going to be Halloween Resurrection from 2002. This is yet again another incredibly dumb movie. The opening 15 minutes are frustratingly stupid. Killing off Laurie and just butchering her character, okay, I get it that Jamie Lee Curtis wanted to be killed off in this movie, but they just wanted her back for one final movie. That's just stupid. Then she kisses Michael before she dies? What is this? The iterations of Laurie that we've seen before would have never have done that, but would you have done that? I don't think so. The dialogue and characters are painfully bad, boring, don't remember really any of their names either. The movie itself is just boring. It's a slog to get through, and it's under an hour and a half. It feels twice as long as it really is. And Michael Myers is awful here too. And you know when Michael is bad, there's something wrong with your movie. I would put it up there as one of the worst movies I've ever seen, just like a bad movie, but I put it above the two Rob Zombie movies because I just dislike those movies more. Those aren't particularly some of the worst movies I've ever seen because I know that some people like it and I can get why some people like it. This movie is just ever so slightly above those two movies, I guess. But they're all honestly irredeemable movies, I feel. And here's where the hot takes start to come in, because coming in just above that is going to be Halloween 3 Season of the Witch. Good God, this movie made me so frustrated. Because one, is a Halloween movie, it fails on nearly every single level. The idea of just tacking on the name Halloween in front of the title makes zero sense. It has no reason to exist as a part of this entire franchise and universe. It's also even in its own universe because the only reason how it is somewhat connected to Halloween in general is that one of the characters is watching the original movie in a bar. That's it though. I found the overall mystery in the movie to just not be that interesting either. It's barely even a horror movie. There is some creepy imagery, but that's about it though. The Doctor, Dr. Chalice I believe is his name, he is a weak protagonist. There's little to no writing depth with his character. This is definitely more of a paranoid thriller, and I would hesitate to even call it anything other than that. The editing is bad. But you know what's one thing I can give it? It has a ballsy ass ending, and I can appreciate it for that. Coming in at 9th place is going to be Halloween 5: The Revenge of Michael Myers. Now we'll talk about Halloween 4 a little bit higher up on this list. But straight out of the gate, the fact that Jamie and Michael are connected now, no. Not a fan of that in the slightest. Also, why can't Jamie talk anymore either? For like 2/3 of this movie, she doesn't say a word, and she can only just mumble, but there's no explanation behind that. Continuing on with talking about the characters, Loomis has practically gone insane trying to get whatever information he can from Jamie, and the characters in this movie are just written to be so dumb. And speaking of writing, there was one scene with utterly awful dialogue and use of sound effects with the 2 cop characters. If you've seen this movie, I think you know what I'm talking about. The lousy cops, even though they're in the movie for like maybe less than a minute, it was bad. It's just a big drop off in quality when talking about from the 4th movie to now this. That 4th movie was somewhat good. The score features odd tracks with weird use of guitar. It makes you feel like you're watching a completely different movie, and when a score doesn't complement the movie itself, I have big problems with that. And even the lame teenagers, they have way too much screen time. They are legitimately just in this movie, and I know that there are a lot of characters in the Halloween franchise that are in a lot of these movies just to be killed off. I understand that. It absolutely drags in the 2nd act. As for a plot, there really isn't one. The ADR in this movie, which if you don't know is additional dialogue replacement, that's what it stands for. It is terrible, like some of the worst I've ever seen in a movie. I guess you could say it is kind of funny how bad it is, and the ending is just so unrealistic, dumb, and just setting up another movie, and then it just cuts to black fairly abruptly. But I'd say this any day over Season of the Witch. In 8th place, it's going to be Halloween: The Curse of Michael Myers. Probably one of the most divisive movies in the franchise, although there are many divisive movies in this franchise. It has an interesting setup, and that's what I really started to like about it. Plus, it also gave us the introduction of Paul Rudd into Hollywood. But from there, it quickly drops off in quality, and it turns into a very overstuffed movie with cool ideas, but rushed execution, and there's really not enough runtime to have each idea be fleshed out. The jump scares are terrible. And speaking of scores, this movie probably has one of the worst of the newer themes. I hated the flashy editing. At times, I couldn't even see what was going on screen because of just how distracting it was. And John Strode, straight up, he is one of the biggest assholes I've ever seen in a movie. This movie is honestly pretty frustrating because it could have been pretty solid, but instead it's just a jumbled mess, and I personally am just not a fan of it. Now above that is going to be Halloween 2 from 1981. I have never been a fan of this movie. I never really have gotten the appreciation for it that so many other people appreciate it for. I think it's not very suspenseful at all. The kills and slasher elements feel weak. I'm not a particular fan of the nearly all one setting of the hospital in this movie. The movie really just takes place at the hospital, and that's about it. You know what I did like though? The twist between Laurie and Michael, and it's unfortunate that they just kind of got rid of it later on in the franchise. But this movie will just repeat and redo scenes from the original. It's a lackluster sequel to say the least. And then we have Halloween Kills. I've had an interesting relationship with this movie because when I first watched it, I really was not a fan of it. I found it to be disappointing and just an overall letdown of a sequel. But then rewatching it just this past week, I liked it more than I did on the first watch, but it's not necessarily like all that of a great movie still. The first 30 minutes is dark, and I really liked that. The flashback at the beginning of the movie, I was like, okay, I'm getting into this. It's damn bloody and violent too. Michael and some of the kills that he does is some of the most goriest we've seen in the franchise. But then the movie fairly quickly turns to shit, or more so madness the closer you get to the end of it, sadly. Because at first I liked what they were doing and setting up the town rallying together to try to kill Michael. We saw glimpses of that in a couple movies. This is the first time where they really fleshed out that idea in this franchise. When you get to the evil dies tonight stuff, that is such BS. The dialogue can be really rough, and don't even get me started on the 2 Johns who are utterly pointless, have no real reason to be in this movie. It adds nothing, but I guess, like I mentioned briefly, it adds more people for Michael to kill and adds to the kill count, I guess. Another reason why I don't like the civilians after they get together and they start just going to turn into madness, they kill a civilian that very clearly is not Michael. If you took one quick look at him and then they try to excuse the fact that, oh, it might have looked like Michael, no, that's inexcusable. Just killing a random mental patient, that's stupid writing. And Michael has kind of always been a superhuman or super being, and they've kind of just hinted at that throughout all of the movies. That's something I just looked past before just because for whatever reason I just did. But here it just takes that and honestly just goes too far with it, making it so unbelievable to the point where I just get frustrated. He gets shot like 10 times in like the final confrontation with all the civilians, but is able to survive and then kill them all. Look, like I said, I didn't mind it as much as I did the first time around, but it's still a movie with a lot of dumb writing decisions that are hard to get past. In 5th place, that was going to be Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers. Now, straight up, this movie is cheesy. I liked how it had the fall vibes though, and especially when you're watching a movie in the spooky season when they have just the fall vibe and fall elements added to it, I just give it bonus points for that. And because Michael is back finally after Season of the Witch, it feels like a return to form for the franchise. I didn't mind the absence of Laurie, but Danielle Harris isn't the best actor in this movie. She is young and this is one of her first roles at the time, so it is understandable, I guess. Yeah, I could do without the teen drama. This movie originally, I feel, started the idea of the town rallying together, trying to get Michael, and if anything, Halloween Kills just fleshed out that aspect even more. You do have to suspend your disbelief throughout this movie, I'll say that. What's the explanation for Michael and Loomis surviving in Halloween 2? There is no explanation. It's pretty non-existent. I think the ending is fun too. Does it make sense logistically? No, not exactly. But I can see where they were coming from with it. Kind of a guilty pleasure movie for me because I know it's not the best of movies, but I do find enjoyment in it. And at the end of the day, when it comes to rankings like these, that's where the factor of deciding where these movies go on the list, who goes above this one and that one, is just because of that enjoyment factor. How does that play into it? And 4th place is going to be Halloween H2O or 20 Years Later. I've always been a defender of this movie. I've always found a lot of enjoyment in it. It's pretty funny. It's great to have Laurie back. It has so many callbacks to the original, and I can appreciate that. Plus, the icing on the cake for me, at least, was it has that cheesy feel, and it's a movie that is just easily digestible. That's a good factor that plays into it. Plus, I think that's what makes it fun. Plus, I honestly forgot that Joseph Gordon-Levitt was in this movie. In terms of the cast, this movie has actually a pretty stacked cast of familiar faces that we would know today. Maybe not notable faces that we would have known 20 or 30 years ago. But on this rewatch specifically, it did go down just a little bit in terms of my grading factor too, because the thrills and scares are so lackluster. Michael's mask is arguably the worst it's ever been. And something that really bugged me this time around was actually the score. I felt it was too much. It felt too powerful, really. Maybe that just had to go into editing and how they should have toned down the volume even just ever so slightly. Oh, the volume is just too loud for most scenes I found. Especially when it's just blaring, that also just ruins the jump scares too. So I think it's a solid time. And in terms of having lackluster thrills and scares, I think it does make somewhat up for it and just being another fun return to form for the franchise. But actually coming into 3rd place for me is going to be the newly released Halloween Ends. Now, if you want to hear my full, in-depth, spoiler-free thoughts on this movie, I'll leave my video review linked right up above. But as for my quick thoughts on it, the reason why it is so high up on this list and even just in 3rd place is because of just me respecting the hell out of it. It plays out much differently when comparing it to the other Halloween movies that we've seen on this list. The writing is ballsy without getting into too much spoilers. The addition of the new character Corey and how much of a presence he has in this movie and just the overall story, that's a big move, especially in the final movie for a franchise. That is a ballsy move. But luckily, I felt that it paid off. It's dumb, but I just still respected it. Really, this entire newer trilogy is kind of dumb. And as for being the end to the franchise, I thought it tied up everything up pretty nicely. Really satisfying conclusion to just the trilogy in general, but also Laurie, and this being her swan song too. Michael takes a bit of a step back in this movie. I know that that's going to have fans divided. I might be in the minority on this one, but I did thoroughly enjoy it, and that's why it is so high up on this list. But at number 2 is going to be Halloween from 2018. Now, all of these movies have their own Easter eggs sprinkled throughout, but this movie just pays homage and has so many Easter eggs to all the Halloween movies, really. If you're a fan of the franchise, I think you'll enjoy that aspect like I did. As you can tell, I do think it is the best Halloween sequel. I just have a fun time with it. It's an enjoyable movie. It has similar beats to especially the first Halloween movie, but it has some gnarly violence. And someone I feel who doesn't get talked about enough in this movie is Jibril Nantambu. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. He has a very small role in this movie, but he is a scene stealer. This movie has one of my favorite iterations of Laurie, and I like this version. Even though they're in different timelines, you see glimpses of the Laurie in the H2O movie struggle with trauma, and so a person who struggles to get past that one fateful night. But I think in this movie, in terms of exploring trauma and how different of a person Laurie feels after the obviously terrible events that have happened throughout her life, I liked what they did with the character of Laurie, but you know who I didn't like what they did with the character of? Loomis. As for the twist, like I'm sure many of you are, I am not a fan of this twist. The fact that he very briefly helps Michael and tries to kill the officer, and also even just Laurie to referring him as the new Loomis, she literally calls him that, it's so on the nose. But you know what, while it may not be a perfect movie, like I said, it's enjoyable, and the ending, I really dig, and if they ended everything here, I think that could have been cool, even though they never would have, because before the movie was even made, they had already signed a 3-picture deal with Blumhouse. But how everything just all plays out, I think that would have been a damn near perfect ending. But easily coming in first place, to no one's surprise really, Halloween from 1978. I'm just gonna straight up say it. This is arguably one of, if not my favorite horror movies of all time, if you couldn't tell by my t-shirt. For me personally, this is one of those movies that reminds me why I love movies and just filmmaking in general. Not only does it prove how much you can do on such a small budget, but I also find more and more to appreciate as I rewatch it over the years. It starts off with a thrilling opening sequence. Honestly, I can't even imagine seeing that in the theater back in the 70s. That would have been crazy. And the subtle direction from John Carpenter works wonders, especially in that sequence, but just throughout the movie, really. And speaking of John Carpenter, the score is just chef's kiss, so good. This is actually one of the few Halloween movies, if not the only Halloween movie, that actually gets my spine tingling, and is actually just pretty creepy, because the scenes of just Michael standing and or just staring at a person, but especially Laurie, the camera is just standing there and you're just watching him watch her walk away. That is nerve-wracking. Yeah, some of the acting isn't the greatest, but I don't really find that to be the biggest of problems for me. I acknowledge that, but it doesn't really take away anything from the overall experience. And Donald Pleasence, I don't think he was ever able to recapture how good of a performance he gave in this movie. He is superb here. This is undoubtedly one of the best, if not the best, slasher movie of all time. As terrifying as it can be at times, I have such a fun time watching it, and it is one of my favorite movies of all time, so that's why it had to come in at number 1. But guys, that is it. That does it for my ranking of all of the 13 movies in the Halloween franchise. Once again, join me down below in the comment section and let me know your ranking of all of the movies. I'd love to see your list, and just thank you so much for watching this video. And if you did enjoy it, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button once again. Plus hit that notification bell so you don't miss any further videos like this. And as always, look forward to more videos coming soon. My name is Ben, people call me Meter, and I'll see you guys in the next one.